This next piece is for everyone who thinks poetry is just too difficult to understand. OETA Arts Program Gallery recently teamed up with 4 of Oklahoma's poetic movers and shakers to put poetry in its place. Here's an excerpt.
Oh, my love's like a red, red rose that newly sprung in June. Oh, my love's like the melody that's sweetly played in tune.
Most poetry, real poetry, comes from a more sort of natural expression of the poet's soul. And when we think of the thee and thou, and that's not the way most poetry works. Shakespeare wrote that way and Donne wrote that way because that was the natural expression of their age. The greatest poetry, and the poetry that survives, is the poetry that uses the language of its time. A poet today who's trying to write as if he lived in the 17th century is going to write poems that are already dead. A poet who works today has to use the language of today. And that's a constant challenge. That's one of the things that keeps poetry exciting.
I'm a t-shirt and jeans guy trapped in a fashion mall. Privilege drips down the sides of the escalators. This place is so lifeless that I expect to see George Romero and a film crew around every corner.
Poetry is a way, I think, of reaching out, of saying, here's how I feel about the world. How do you feel about it? Sometimes people ask, what is a poem? And there's not a definition for a poem. Any number of good poems will violate any rule for poetry you establish. A poem is just something that looks like a poem, sounds like a poem.
There is a world out there that needs to taste the slick and dirty secrets that you keep buried in the stockroom. You keep shoveling your failures down your throat so no one will see you fall. You keep treating this gift you've been given like a ticket to the suffering parade.
Poetry slam is competitive spoken word. So essentially, a poet gets up with a piece 3 minutes in length that they've composed themselves, and they yell their poem at the audience.
Teach me humility, teach me humanity.
We have a team competition, which is the National Poetry Slam, and then we have the individual World Poetry Slam, which happens usually in October, and that's the best of individual poets from all over the country. And myself, I'm ranked 3rd in the world right now.
Catch your wild roots in your crazy pulp hands and grow up. Growth is a choice, like work is a choice, like failure is a choice, like bloom is a choice, and bloom is a choice.
People think the slam poetry is a new thing, but the first poets delivered their poems out loud. Beowulf, the first great English poem, wasn't written originally, it was chanted.
Poets they're not wise, they're just people. They're just people with the same questions as everybody else. They just happen to write them down.
I think people just think we talk about trees a lot, and like, oh, the darkness. But there's so much depth to what we perform about. There's laughter, there's heartache. Really, we're just sharing secrets.
Some people will ask me, how in the world did you come up with this? And I say, I don't know, I say thank you to the spirit of creativity, because things will just emerge and think, wow, that's pretty cool, well, I'll put that in here.
Poetry can be for everybody the way that music is for everybody, or painting is for everybody. And that, if you pick up a poet and you don't like it, well, that's a poet you don't like, not poetry that you don't like. You should try somebody else.
Your voice feels like honey and rain.
I don't like every song I hear on the radio. It doesn't mean I don't like music. Poetry is good for us. It's good for our soul. It enlivens us and encourages us and helps us.